Tokyo fell silent, not the ordinary hush of a cold morning or a respectful pause in a crowded temple. It was the silence of memory waking up, the kind that creeps into your spine before your ears even register the change. People looked up instinctively, shielding their eyes from the sharp sunlight. Above the city, 5 black shadows cut through the sky, fast, low, relentless. They were P-51 Mustangs, aircraft from a war that most had only seen in textbooks or museums. But for those old enough to remember, like her, the sound of those engines was not historical. It was personal. She stood still, her fingertips grazing the edge of the teacup on the windowsill. 68 years old, hair pulled back in a bun too tight for comfort, a patterned robe tied loosely at the waist. Her name was Miyuki Tanaka. At least, that was the name the world knew. The moment she saw those planes, everything inside her stopped. Her breath, her thoughts, even her sense of time. The rumble of the propellers hit. Next, that deep, unmistakable growl that comes not from the sky, but from somewhere under your ribs. She didn't just hear it, she remembered it. The smell of oil and dust, the metallic scream that came after the bomb doors opened, the way the children used to run under the bridges, holding their breath as if the silence would shield them. This wasn't an air show, this was a message. She lived in Sumida now, a quiet district near the old river. Her apartment overlooked a primary school and a cemetery. In the mornings, she watched the children arrive in neat lines. In the evenings, she listened to the temple bells echo over the tombs. It was peaceful, manageable, until today. When the engines faded and the sky regained its color, Miyuki walked back inside, her hands trembling slightly. On the floor, half tucked under her door, was an envelope, thick paper, foreign seal. No name, no stamp, just one emblem pressed into the wax. A shield, 4 letters, USAF. She did not open it. Instead, she sat at the old kitchen table with chipped paint and 2 chairs. She stared at the envelope like it was a ghost. Maybe it was. The last time she saw that symbol, she was 22. Her hair was long then, her English was perfect, and her decisions changed the course of more than just her life. Her tea had gone cold. Outside, the children laughed again, their voices returning like birds after a storm. But something in the air had shifted. The silence had entered her bones, and she knew exactly why. It had been 50 years since Okinawa, since the files, since the betrayal. The woman known as Yumi Nakamura had died that day. Miyuki Tanaka was born out of necessity, a name to bury the past, a name to survive. The problem with surviving is that it always costs more than dying. You keep paying, in guilt, in dreams, in the faces you can never call your children again. She opened the drawer next to her, not to find a knife or a gun, just a photo, faded, creased, nearly forgotten. 2 people in uniform, smiling under a cherry blossom tree. Him in a U.S. Air Force jacket, her in a civilian interpreter badge. Her eyes were wide, trusting. His were not. People think betrayal is loud, that it comes with shouting or slammed doors. But the worst betrayals whisper. They come dressed in uniforms and flowers. They wear smiles and speak your language. And when they take everything, they leave you enough breath to stay alive, just enough to remember. She slid the photo back and closed the drawer. There were things she hadn't said out loud in decades, not to anyone, not even to herself. Like how it felt to sign a document in a language your country never taught you to read, or how shame grows like mold, feeding on every quiet night, and how the people you tried to protect ended up fearing your name more than the enemy's. No one had spoken her real name in half a century. The planes had. She stood again and walked to the window, now fully aware of how deep the ache in her legs had grown over the years. Age has a way of slowing the body and speeding the mind. The more you forget physically, the more the past remembers you. For years, she restored sacred artifacts in hidden temples, painted over the cracks, rebuilt faces of forgotten deities. It was ironic, really, fixing what others had worshipped while hiding the truth of what she had broken. And now, it was here, in her hallway, wrapped in an envelope. They had found her, not because they needed her, but because someone wanted her to speak or stay silent forever. Both options were dangerous. On the wall behind her, an old clock ticked, the same one she had taken with her the day she left her real life behind. She remembered the bus ride to Kyoto, the way she had cut her hair in a restroom mirror with dull scissors, the way she couldn't stop shaking when she first introduced herself as Miyuki. A lie is only a lie until someone believes it. She had believed hers for so long, it had turned into truth. But lies rot, even the well-kept ones. A wind swept through the window, knocking over a small ceramic fox on her bookshelf. She picked it up carefully, brushing dust from its ears. It was a kitsune, a symbol of trickery and protection. Her grandmother used to say that every woman carried a little fox in her heart. One part guardian, one part thief. She held the fox tightly. In the distance, the faint sound of sirens, not urgent, just present, like a reminder. The letter was still on the table. She didn't touch it again that night. Some truths do not burn when you read them. They burn when you realize they waited too long to be read. If you believe stories like this matter, that memories must be heard before they disappear, leave a comment below with the word legacy, and make sure to subscribe to this channel for more untold voices. Because some truths only live when we listen. Before she was Miyuki Tanaka, she was Yumi Nakamura. The name belonged to a girl born in Siiritsu, the ashes of a burnt-out Hiroshima suburb in 1954, where broken buildings shared space with broken promises. Her earliest memories weren't of toys or lullabies, but of her mother cleaning blood from the doorstep after drunken soldiers passed through the alley. War doesn't always end when treaties are signed. Sometimes, it lingers in the corners of kitchens and under the nails of tired women trying to scrub away history. Yumi's father died when she was 3, not in combat, but in silence, with lungs full of dust and defeat, after years of carrying bricks to rebuild what the bombs had shattered. Her mother raised her alone, working as a laundry girl in the American quarters in Iwakuni. That was where Yumi first heard English. Words tossed between uniforms like poker chips, commands barked, orders whispered, laughter that made her mother flinch. By the age of 10, she could mimic accents better than any radio announcer. Language for her became survival. The more she listened, the more invisible she became. That was the goal. Invisible girls don't get touched, they don't get chosen. When she turned 17, a translator program opened at a vocational school in Okinawa, funded by a bilateral cooperation initiative. It was sold as opportunity. It was really preparation. A generation of young Japanese women trained to work inside American bases, helping smooth communications between cultures that still didn't trust each other. Yumi excelled. Her memory was photographic, her face unreadable. They said she had no emotion, but she was just always watching, listening. By 20, she was fluent in English, certified by both governments. She was stationed at the Kadena Air Base, one of the largest American installations outside the continental U.S. It was 1974. Nixon had just resigned. Tensions still boiled quietly from Vietnam. The Cold War was no longer cold, and in those corridors, everyone knew something was always about to happen. That was when she met Captain Eli Thomas. He was charming in the way danger often is. Square jaw, southern drawl. He liked jazz and Japanese poetry. He called her Firefly, not because she glowed, but because she only lit up when everything else went dark. He made her feel seen, not watched, not used, but seen. He spoke to her like an equal, trusted her with files that were too sensitive for general staff. And when he told her there were men in the base smuggling weapons and rerouting cargo under false signatures, she believed him. When he asked for her help translating files to build a case, she said yes. She didn't ask questions when he asked her to remove her ID badge and follow him into restricted areas at night. She didn't stop when he asked her to transcribe names off a list in a dim-lit office full of locked cabinets. What she didn't know was that those documents had nothing to do with base corruption. They were tactical maps, air deployment sequences, positioning data, coordinates of Japanese defense systems that were not supposed to be shared. 3 weeks after she handed him the final translation, he vanished. No goodbye, no explanation, just gone. The day after, she was escorted from the base by military police. Her apartment was ransacked, her typewriter confiscated, and her name erased. She never faced a trial, not officially. There were meetings behind closed doors, men who spoke in code and used words like containment and collateral. She was told she could leave with her life, but not her past. If she ever spoke again about what she saw, she would not be so lucky next time. Her mother never forgave her. Her son, only 4 at the time, was taken by her older sister in Nagasaki. She never saw him again. They gave her a train ticket to Kyoto, some cash, a fake name, and a warning. The train ride was the longest 6 hours of her life. She cut her hair in a public restroom with a dull pair of scissors, burned the only photo she had of Captain Thomas at a bus terminal ashtray. She didn't cry. There were no more tears left to spill. She started working in temples, cleaning floors, carrying buckets, painting touch-ups under supervision. No questions asked. Quiet women are welcomed in places built on silence. One day, the head monk saw her restoring a statue with unusual precision. He asked where she learned to work with gold leaf. She said nothing, but he let her stay. Years passed. She built a routine so rigid it became armor. Wake up at 5, work until sunset, eat miso soup and rice, sleep without dreaming. No friends, no photos, no past, but the memories always leaked through, in the smell of military boots on the subway, in the click of typewriter keys from old crime dramas on late-night TV, in the sound of her own breathing, steady and alone, every night. She sometimes wondered about her son, if he had grown up to hate her, if he even knew her name. She had given up the right to ask. Guilt doesn't age. It calcifies. It becomes part of your spine, your knees, your voice. It shows up in how you bow, in how you hesitate before using your real accent, in how you never quite relax even when you're alone. Some people say the worst punishment is prison, but the truth is, freedom without identity is a slower sentence. Every street she walked down carried the risk of someone recognizing her eyes. Every news headline was a reminder that silence had kept her alive, but not whole. Even now, decades later, the question remained. Was she guilty, or was she simply naive? Did she betray her country, or was she sacrificed by it? The truth never came with certainty, only with weight. If this story speaks to something in you, if it reminds you how heavy secrets can become when carried alone, let us know in the comments with the word burden. And subscribe to our channel for more stories that deserve to be remembered. Because silence might protect you, but truth sets you free in ways silence never can. The envelope remained on the kitchen table for 3 days. Miyuki never touched it. She simply moved around it like it was a crack in the floor she didn't want to fall into. She cooked simple meals, lit incense for the dead, repaired a cracked porcelain statue of Jizo in her workshop downstairs. But something in her posture had shifted. Her shoulders carried a tension that hadn't been there before. Her eyes no longer lingered on the present. She was listening for footsteps from the past. It was not paranoia, it was experience. There is a certain rhythm to being hunted. Even when it is not obvious, the body knows. She began to see unfamiliar faces in familiar places. A foreign man at the corner cafe reading a newspaper in English. A car parked too long in the alley near her workshop. Calls that ended in silence. She had lived long enough to recognize patterns, the ones that start slowly before closing in like a storm. By the 5th day, her front door was no longer just a door. It was a question. Who was going to walk through it first? And when? She didn't have to wait long. That afternoon, a man knocked. His voice was polite, his Japanese, too careful. When she opened the door, he introduced himself in English. His name was Mark Lowen, a freelance journalist from Boston. He smiled like he had just stumbled onto a treasure, but his eyes revealed something closer to a hunter. He said he was writing a piece on Cold War intelligence failures in Asia, that he had been following a trail of classified military leaks connected to a female. Translator stationed at Kadena in the 1970s. Said her name was Yumi Nakamura. Said he believed she was dead. Said it casually, like a test. She didn't flinch, just offered him tea. The moment he sat down, he placed a small voice recorder on the table. Red light blinking. He had no idea she noticed his hands, the way they trembled slightly, the way he leaned forward with too much interest. He was used to subjects who didn't know how to guard a story, but Miyuki had lived inside silence for half a century. She knew how to fold her truth into a smile. She answered nothing directly, asked him about his flight instead, offered rice crackers, watched him. When he left, he thanked her for her time and said he might come back with more questions. She nodded. He would. After he disappeared down the stairwell, she closed the door and locked it with shaking fingers. That night, she pulled out an old metal box from under a loose floorboard. Inside were documents she had kept, despite the risk. Copies of translated orders, old IDs, a cassette tape with no label, her entire erased life pressed into fragile paper and magnetic tape. She spread them across the table like a deck of ghosts. If Mark had come all the way from America, it meant someone had been digging. And if someone had been digging, then the people who once buried her story might be preparing to bury it again. She was not the only one in danger. The following morning, her grandson Kenji arrived unannounced, tall, awkward, and always filming something for his student projects. He had his camera slung over his shoulder like a second limb. He kissed her on the cheek and dropped his backpack on the floor like he used to when he was 10. She asked him what brought him over on a weekday. He hesitated, then pulled out a hard drive. He had been working on a documentary for his university, something about forgotten Japanese-American tensions during the Cold War. During his research, he found a military documentary, uploaded by a veterans archive site. In one segment, there was a woman standing beside American officers, pointing at a map. The video was grainy, but her face was clear. He paused the clip, looked at her. "Grandma, who is this?" Her heart beat so loudly, she thought he could hear it, but she stayed quiet. He asked again, "It looks like you. The same eyes. Even the way she holds the pen. It is you, isn't it?" She denied it, but her voice betrayed her. She had never been able to lie to Kenji. He didn't press, just looked away. That silence hurt more than questions ever could. Later that night, he sat by her as she prepared tea. "Did you ever do something because you thought it would save someone, and then it turned out to hurt everyone instead?" She didn't answer, just poured his tea. The silence spoke for her. After he went to bed, she stepped out into the cold courtyard behind her building, lit a cigarette for the first time in 20 years. She stared at the stars, remembered the words of Captain Thomas on their last night together. Truth is the first thing sacrificed in war. People are second. She wondered what number she had been. She returned inside and sat beside the envelope, the one she still had not opened. She had thought the war was over, but it had never ended. It had simply gone quiet. She knew now that Mark Lowen would not stop, and if he didn't find answers, someone else would. Truth spreads like ink in water. Once released, everything it touches. And now, Kenji was involved. There are only two ways to protect those you love. You either shield them from the truth, or you prepare them to carry it. She had done the first for too long. If this story touches something inside you, if it reminds you how the past can echo into the present when we least expect it, leave a comment below with the word echo and subscribe to stay connected to stories that remind us nothing truly disappears when it is left unresolved. When the article broke, it was buried halfway down an American defense blog, the kind frequented by retired officers and amateur historians. The headline was unassuming, almost clinical. Unconfirmed presence of Cold War asset in Tokyo. It barely mentioned her name, just 3 short paragraphs, enough to start a fire. Miyuki read it at 5:30 in the morning, the screen light flickering in the dark. Kenji had forwarded it without comment. She knew that silence. It wasn't shock, it was disappointment, dressed in caution. The kind that says, "I do not know who you are, but I still want to protect you." The blog post had been signed by Mark Lowen. Her tea cooled untouched. That day, the calls began. First from unknown numbers, then from blocked IDs, then from voices that didn't speak, just breathed, slow, measured, familiar in tone but never in name. Like someone had turned back time and gave a phone to ghosts. Miyuki stopped answering after the third day. She didn't need confirmation. She recognized the AB. In her old life, silence was how threats began. The polite kind, the kind that ends in character assassinations or quiet disappearances. Not loud, not violent, just erasure. The scariest part was not the calls. It was the envelope she received 2 nights later. Not the first one, a second. This one had no seal, just a single typed sentence on a blank page. Stop digging, or we will. She sat with it for hours, fingers resting on the edge of the paper like it might bite. The air felt heavier after that, like the building itself knew the walls were listening. That night, the hallway lights flickered 3 times. No one else noticed, but she did. She started locking the back window, not out of fear, out of respect for herself, for the danger she had tried so hard to bury, for the lives still connected to her name, even if they didn't know it yet. The real fracture came 3 days later, at the university. Kenji had been called in for questioning after someone accessed classified archives using his school login. Someone had planted his ID into a breach attempt on a military declassification database. He was cleared, eventually, but not without consequences. His scholarship was suspended pending investigation. His final project was frozen, and someone left a printed photo of his grandmother on his locker, circa 1974, in uniform. He brought the photo to her without speaking. She took it without pretending. His voice was steady. You said you were just translator. I was. You said you helped. I did. Then why are they coming for me? The question hung in the air like smoke, heavy, inevitable. She didn't cry. She just whispered, because they never meant to let the story end. He stood up to leave, but turned before stepping outside. You always told me to tell the truth. Was that a lie, too? That night, she opened the box again, the one with the tapes and the faded documents. She opened it with anger, not at him, at herself, fear, at the years at the wasted world for letting her carry the blame alone. She began reviewing the contents piece by piece, writing annotations in the margins, scanning what she could into a digital folder. It was her testimony now. If someone wanted to destroy her, they would have to face her entire truth. Among the tapes, she found one she didn't remember labeling, an old cassette, dusty, half erased by time. She played it on a small recorder. The sound was weak, warped, but clear enough to hear. American voices. One was Captain Thomas, her old handler, her lover, the man who vanished. The other was someone she never heard before. They were discussing assets, names, targets, and then her name. Not Yumi, not Miyuki. Her code name, Firefly. She hadn't heard it in over 40 years. The recording ended with a chilling line. Once the Firefly has done her job, we snuff her out. Quiet, surgical. She dropped the recorder. The sound of plastic against wood was louder than the plane engines that haunted her dreams. That single sentence changed everything. She had not just been used. She had been scheduled for elimination. She walked to the mirror and stared at herself, not with fear, but clarity. For decades, she had believed she had betrayed a country, but the truth was worse. She had been betrayed by every side. They had left her alive because someone, somewhere, forgot to finish the job. But she was still here, and now, so was the proof. She didn't call Kenji, not yet. Everything she needed to gather. Make sure the story could not be buried again. She knew how they operated. First they threaten, then they isolate, then they destroy credibility. But they could not erase a digital archive once it spread, and she knew how to release things that could never be pulled back. Later that evening, she returned to her workshop. There, behind an altar, hidden beneath the flooring, she retrieved another box, one she had sworn never to open. It contained a medal she had never received, letter of recommendation never delivered, and a fragment of her first ID badge snapped in half. On the back of the medal was an engraving, to the one who served in silence. For the first time in decades, she laughed, not out of joy, out of the absurdity of being honored for disappearing. She took the medal, placed it in front of the camera, and began to record her own message. This is not a confession. This is a correction. If this story made you feel something, even if you are not sure what it is yet, leave the word "awaken" in the comments and consider subscribing. These are not just stories. They are truths finally told. It was 3:30 in the morning when Miyuki finished scanning the last page. Her eyes burned. Her fingers trembled from hours of handling paper that had survived decades longer than it should have. She had cataloged every document, cross-referenced names, logged dates, connected codes from hand-marked envelopes to incident reports she had only heard whispered. During late nights at Kadena, she saved everything in 3 encrypted drives. One went into a safe deposit box under a friend's name. Another was mailed to a lawyer she had once helped repair a ceremonial Buddha. The third she kept close, taped beneath the drawer of her tea cabinet, under the dried lavender. She was no longer preparing to hide, she was preparing to be heard. At sunrise, she called the one person she had avoided for 20 years. Aya Suzuki was a human rights attorney known for her quiet persistence. She specialized in state accountability, mostly on post-war government crimes and suppressed civilian testimonies. They hadn't spoken since the night Miyuki backed out of a witness statement in 2004, a decision that cost Aya her case and nearly her career. Miyuki apologized before even saying hello. When Aya heard the word Firefly, her voice dropped. She asked 2 questions. Is it safe to speak? And is it still on tape? Miyuki answered yes to both. They met in a park, the edge of Kamakura, just beyond the reach of cell towers. The conversation was brief, but heavy. Miyuki handed her a flash drive. Aya didn't ask for more. She just promised she would build the wall before the storm hit. Within 48 hours, Aya assembled a quiet team of journalists, digital archivists, and academic allies. The goal was simple: make the story indestructible. If Miyuki went down, the truth would not go with her. But the most unexpected ally came from closer to home. Returned with a plan of his own. He had spoken to a professor who ran an underground oral history project focused on forgotten women of World War II. The professor had offered to produce a digital mini-series featuring testimonies of Japanese women erased from official records. They wanted Miyuki to be the first voice. At first, she hesitated, not because of fear, but because of the camera, the intimacy of it, the way it sees things people are trained to hide. Wrinkles become roads, silence becomes confession. But Kenji convinced her. He said people forget documents, they ignore files, but they remember a face when it trembles telling the truth. They filmed in her workshop, under natural light, no makeup, no direction, just her and the past. She started with her childhood, the sounds of bomb drills, the smell of rice vinegar and burning rubber, then Okinawa, then Thomas, then the silence. When she reached the part about the voice on the tape, the one that called for elimination, she paused. Her eyes didn't water, her jaw tightened. She said, "I was never meant to live long enough to speak." Kenji lowered the camera. But here you are. Aya released the first 10-minute segment 2 weeks later through a secure channel. Within hours, it was mirrored across platforms. The story reached news outlets in Europe, activist circles in South Korea, and military blogs in the United States. The term Operation Firefly began trending, but exposure has consequences. 2 men appeared outside her building the next day, clean suits, quiet shoes. They did not knock, they waited, observed. Mark Lowen confirmed that he had been contacted by someone from the Department of Defense, asking if he knew her current location. He lied, said she was in Hokkaido. She sent him a message of thanks with a photo of an origami crane, the same kind she once folded on a military desk while pretending not to hear secrets. But this time, she was not folding. She was unfolding. An anonymous tip delivered an envelope to Aya's office. Inside were military clearance records from the 1970s showing that Captain Thomas had never been declared dead or missing. Instead, he had been reassigned under a new identity, rewarded with diplomatic immunity for services rendered during Operation Firefly. Miyuki stared at the signature, He had signed off on the memo requesting her removal. It had always been him. And still, somewhere deep in her chest, a part of her waited for a different ending. That he had been forced, that he had regretted it. But there was no footnote for regret, just ink, permanent, cold. She printed the memo, placed it beside the medal they had given her without her knowledge. Then, she added a note for her grandson. This is not your shame to carry, but it is your legacy to protect. She began planning a public statement, not in a courtroom, not in front of a government commission, but in a public square, under the sky. She would speak for every woman who had no record, no apology, for everyone who had their name erased from history books, but not from memory, and for herself, finally. If stories like this stir something inside you, if they remind you of the power of truth when spoken without permission, leave the word unfold in the comments and subscribe to help us keep these voices alive. Not every war is fought with weapons. Some are fought with memory. The square was not grand, not the kind of place where revolutions begin or flags are raised. It was modest, tucked between a government office and a Buddhist temple. Stone benches lined the edges, worn down by time and stories that had never been told. Miyuki chose it precisely for that reason. It did not demand attention, but it deserved it. She stood near the center, a thin microphone clipped to her collar, the soft rustle of her robe barely caught by the wind. A small group had gathered: students, activists, retired journalists, a handful of curious passers-by. Kenji stood behind the camera, adjusting the angle. Aya, ever vigilant, spoke quietly to a pair of reporters near the back. No banners, no slogans, just a single printed sign resting against a bench. Let her speak. Miyuki stepped forward. Her voice did not tremble. She began by stating her name, her real name, not the one given in paperwork, not the one forged to protect her, but the name buried beneath decades of false starts and fractured truths. I am Yumi Nakamura. I was never a threat. I was a translator, a daughter, a mother. I believed I was helping. She did not read from notes. Her words were memory, sharpened by years of silence. She spoke of Kadena Air Base, of Captain Thomas, of the tape, of the betrayal, not just his, but the entire machinery that made her complicit in something she never understood until it was too late. I did not know the maps were for covert operations. I did not know I was handing over the locations of civilian shelters. I only knew the man I trusted said it would prevent more deaths. I believed him because I wanted to believe peace was possible. The crowd did not move. No one checked their phone. No one coughed. It was as if the air itself had paused to listen. She held up the printed memo bearing his signature, the same one that authorized her termination. The crowd saw the name. Some recognized it. A former attaché, a diplomat once praised for de-escalating conflict in Southeast Asia. Now, his past had become part of her truth. I survived because I disappeared, but the cost was everything. My son, my home, my voice. Her voice cracked only once when she mentioned the photo left in Kenji's locker. The quiet violence of legacy, the way shame passes from one generation to the next when history is left incomplete. I am not here for revenge. I am here for record, because some names do not appear in history books, but they live in consequences. After 13 minutes, she stopped. No applause, just breath. Then, one by one, not out of celebration, out of recognition. Some cried, some just stood still, but all understood they had witnessed something rare. Aya approached with a tablet. Already, the live stream had been mirrored in over 20 countries. The segment trended in news feeds by noon. Dozens of retired officials released vague denials. One former intelligence officer confirmed, anonymously, that Operation Firefly had existed. But the most powerful moment came 3 days later, during a closed-door inquiry held by the National Archive Commission. Miyuki was invited to testify under oath. The chamber was clean, sterile, fluorescent lights and polished wood, a table with a water pitcher, microphones adjusted by quiet assistants. A panel of 6 sat across from her. 5 men, 1 woman, faces that did not smile, eyes that had read every document she submitted but needed her to speak them out loud. She did, with clarity, with restraint, with the measured tone of someone who has carried the baigi burden long enough to know how not to shout it. They asked difficult questions about timelines, about the specifics of what she translated, about why she waited so long to come forward. She answered everything. Then they asked if she had any final remarks. She looked directly at the panel. I was silent, because silence kept me alive. I speak now, because staying alive is no longer enough. The chairwoman closed the session with a nod, not of agreement, but of acknowledgement. When Miyuki left the building, she did not speak to the press. She walked with Kenji to a small cafe, ordered green tea, no sugar, no questions, just presence. That evening, a well-known political commentator posted a thread summarizing her testimony. It ended with the line, "The Firefly lit the path even as they tried to crush her wings." People began placing paper cranes outside the National Archive building, hundreds of them, each with a single word written on its wings: truth. If you believe that stories like this can still shift history, even when whispered through decades of denial, leave the word truth in the comments and consider subscribing. Some legacies are born not from medals or monuments, but from a voice that refused to stay buried. The village she moved to had no name on the standard tourist maps. It was nestled between rice terraces and low, misty hills, 2 hours by train and 1 by bus from Tokyo. The locals called it Kami no Mori, which loosely translates to Forest of the Spirits, a place where people came to forget the noise of the world and remember who they used to be. Miyuki arrived with only 2 suitcases and a sealed envelope addressed to the town's shrine keeper. Inside was a letter from a former student of hers, now a monk, requesting that she be allowed to rent a small room behind the temple. The room had a tatami floor, a low wooden bed, and a single window facing the mountains. It was perfect. She no longer needed more than that. Every morning she walked along the Io trail behind the village, where the fog clung to the branches like memory refusing to let go. She would pause at a stone basin filled with water from the spring, rinse her hands, and press her palms together. Not out of religion, out of rhythm. She began volunteering at the community center, helping other elderly women with calligraphy, storytelling, and ceramic restoration. She taught them how to use gold lacquer to heal cracked pottery, an ancient Japanese technique called kintsugi. It felt right to mend broken things without hiding the damage. One woman asked her how she had learned so much about fixing the past. Miyuki smiled. You only learn when you've had something worth repairing. She no longer kept her face hidden. People in the village recognized her from the video, the public testimony, the reports. But they treated her not as a symbol or a scandal, but as a person who had walked through fire and returned with light. Kenji visited once a month. He always brought his camera, but never turned it on unless she asked. Sometimes they spoke for hours. Sometimes they sat in silence. The bond had been fractured, but not lost. What was most surprising to her was that he no longer looked at her with fear or pity. He looked at her with curiosity, with respect. One day, he brought her a book, a printed version of the transcripts from her public testimony, now published alongside essays from historians, journalists, and survivors. On the cover was a single crane in flight. Inside, a handwritten note from Kenji. For the woman who taught me that truth has wings, even when buried. She held the book like it might vanish. In the months that followed, messages arrived from across the world. Women who had once been dismissed as liars, as traitors, as collateral. Messages from daughters who now believed their mothers. From sons who had found letters hidden in drawers that finally made sense. From veterans who apologized. And from strangers who simply said, I see. You. Miyuki did not answer all of them. She kept most, folded them into small envelopes and placed them into a wooden box. Not for safekeeping, for remembering. In December, she was invited to speak at a memorial ceremony in Okinawa for civilian victims of Cold War intelligence failures. She declined. She did not want a stage. She did not need a microphone. But she sent a letter. In it, she wrote, Justice is not always a verdict. Sometimes it is being believed. Winter passed. the air thin. Cherry blossoms returned to the path behind her new home. She noticed things more clearly now. The color of moss on stone, the smell of wood smoke at dusk, the sound of paper when folded slowly with care. She spent her evenings writing by candlelight, not to document, but to reflect. She wrote letters to her son, even though she had no address, letters to herself at 20, warning her gently and forgiving her sooner, letters to the voices on the tapes, the ones who tried to erase her. She wrote them as if they were still listening, because maybe they were. She still lit a stick of incense every night for those who never got to speak, for the ones who disappeared without a story, for the ones whose truths died with them. And every now and then, she dreamed of planes, not falling, not chasing, just passing by. When she woke, she no longer felt fear, only space. If you've made it this far, and something in this journey echoes inside you, leave the word dignity in the comments. And subscribe if you believe some voices are meant to be carried forward, not buried beneath silence. Sometimes, all it takes to begin again is one person brave enough to speak. 6 months passed, then a year. Time no longer moved with urgency in Miyuki's life. It simply unfolded, like rice paper in the wind. Not every day was peaceful, but peace was no longer something she chased. It was something she learned to carry. Her hair had grown longer, now fully gray, tied loosely with fabric from an oldie kimono. She wore it not to look younger, but to remember who she had been before the world named her things she never asked to be. She still walked the temple trail each morning, passing the stone basin and touching the water as if greeting an old friend. The fog came later now, more gently, like it too had softened with time. The shrine keeper had given her a corner of the garden to care for. She grew tea leaves, wild lavender, and a single blooming sakura tree gifted by a woman who once watched her testimony and wrote back, "I thought my pain was mine alone. Thank you for proving it wasn't." Her hands were slower these days, but her writing was steadier than ever. She continued her letters, not to change the past, but to bear witness to it. Her notebook was nearly full, each page a memory that refused to vanish quietly. Kenji came less often now, not because he had pulled away, but because life had begun to open for him again. His documentary series was nominated for a Cultural Preservation Award. He was asked to speak at conferences, to teach, to guide others through the ethics of memory. He once told her, "I used to carry shame. Now I carry story." She had never been prouder. One afternoon, he brought her a small gift, a pendant, simple, bronze. Inside, a folded piece of paper with a single word, "Remember." She wore it not as a reminder of pain, but of purpose. The village embraced her, not as a hero or a victim, but as something rarer, a woman who survived her own silence, who walked through the wreckage of history, not for vengeance, but for restoration. She became the elder others turned to, the one who listened more than she spoke, the one who taught that healing was not a destination, but a rhythm. In early spring, she hosted a gathering for the women of the region, widows, daughters, survivors. They shared stories over tea and old photos, laughed more than expected, cried less than feared. At the end, she stood and said, "What we do with memory is ours. Let it harden us, or soften what the world forgot to protect." The wind rustled through the trees as if in response. Her final letter was not to the government or to Captain Thomas or to the media. It was to the girl she once was. She wrote, "You were never weak. You were never shameful. You were young and brave and too alone. But even then, you carried truth. It just took time for your voice to find its way back to you." She placed that letter at the base of the sakura tree. Petals and as began to fall, she whispered, "Thank you for waiting. The seasons will keep turning. The world will keep forgetting. But somewhere in the quiet places, stories like hers will remain, passed hand to hand, word to word, never erased again." And to you, watching this now, from wherever you are in the world, thank you for listening, for staying, for carrying this story with you, even for a little while. If this journey has touched you in any way, leave the word honor in the comments. You believe that stories like this must continue to be told? Please subscribe and click on the next video that's about to appear on your screen. You never know. The next story might be yours. Until then, stay brave, stay kind, and never forget that silence is not the end. It is where truth waits for someone to return. Thank you.